off your blindfold.
Did you hear that?
Well, more than 45 million people have seen this Netflix movie called Bird Box starring Sandra Bullock. Characters must wear blindfolds to protect themselves from sights that turn them suicidal.
Well, now the movie is inspiring a dangerous trend called the Bird Box Challenge. People are blindfolding themselves as they try to navigate everyday life.
Now the challenge has gone international at this point. This is a heat map showing everywhere the hashtag Bird Box Challenge was used. As you can see, it's all over the place.
And there's one group of people that does not find this challenge funny. It's those who are visually impaired.
And 10 News reporter Shannon Smith spoke with a blind woman here in East Tennessee on the lessons that can come from this craze. Shannon?
Brandon, Robin, we've all worn a blindfold for some reason or another, but probably not for a social media challenge. The Bird Box Challenge is an interesting one for Sue Buckley of Knoxville, but her challenge doesn't end when you take the blindfold off.
The latest internet phenomenon, the Bird Box Challenge. People try to navigate while blindfolded, just like the characters in the Netflix blockbuster Bird Box. It's not going well.
It seemed to be quite silly because the people do not have any sort of skills at all, being visually impaired, and of course, that's very dangerous.
Dangerous enough that Netflix is telling people to stop, tweeting, "Can't believe I have to say this, but please do not hurt yourselves with this Bird Box Challenge."
From experience, it can be very dangerous, especially when the challenge is going outside.
Sue Buckley would know. She lost her sight when she was in her mid-30s and had to learn to live without her vision. So she's a little frustrated to see people laughing while they bump into walls.
It kind of gives the wrong impression that someone can just put a blindfold on and do things or get a real feeling of what it's like to have a visual impairment.
Buckley isn't alone in this thought. People took to Twitter to call out those taking the challenge, suggesting they donate to a vision charity or learn more about the disability.
This one seems to have no purpose other than kind of laughing at what it would be like.
Buckley hopes there is good that can come from the Bird Box Challenge.
In some ways, it's a compliment that people want to experience what it would be like.
But when challengers take their blindfolds off, Buckley asks them to remember not everyone has that option.
Buckley and other visually impaired people ask that you refrain from doing the challenge unless you'd really like to understand what it's like to live blind. And if you do, be careful and do the challenge inside. Robin, Brandon.
All right, Shannon, thank you. A 13-year-old Delaware boy is being